Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us. Loaded show for us here today. It's the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. He shows up a little bit later on. That's a fun conversation. Some of the stuff we'll talk to Jake about, stuff that we're also going to hit off the top of the program here today, about some of the chatter that's out there about Carson Beck and the other Georgia quarterbacks here right now. We're going to do some of that and bring Jake Fromm into that discussion a little bit later on. Mike Griffith also stops by today there as well. Georgia getting ready for a gigantic super regional series starting Saturday in Athens against NC State. We'll talk to Mike a little bit about that, but also a recap of the events of last week. Mike on hand in Destin, Florida for the SEC spring meetings, where a lot of the future tense conversation sort of was spent looking at what the SEC is about to look like in the years to come and how that impacts Georgia in particular. So we'll do a lot of that on the show today there as well. Also some fun photos kind of showing up as some new Georgia players get comfortable there on campus. We'll have a little bit of fun with that today there as well. So what do you say we get ready to get it started? Plenty of Carson Beck talk and plenty of everything else as well. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to talk about Carson Beck here for a little bit, and if you don't mind, I want to play something that we've played for you before because, and this is not, when we've done this in the past, we've kind of done this from the standpoint of, are they, kind of sliding Carson Beck? Is Carson Beck not getting proper credit or whatever else? And, this is not necessarily meant to be that. This is more about, I think, just, I don't know. It's just sort of a weird conversation that seems to persist around college football. A new example of that today, but it all sort of feels like, the clip, I think we've played this now twice. It's the radio host, Colin Cowherd, on the idea that Carson Beck is just, quote-unquote, Georgia good. Now, one of our commenters of the day, I thought this was a really good idea. He was saying that, or was it he or she? I forget who it was. But if somebody asks you how you're doing, you should say from now on that you're doing Georgia good. That you're not just doing fine. You're not just doing well. You're doing, hey, how you doing? Hey, I'm doing Georgia good. Because if all Carson Beck is quote-unquote Georgia good, then that's a pretty good way to be. And maybe we should all consider ourselves or try to be Georgia good in the future. I thought that was kind of funny. And it's all based on this deal here where Colin Cowherd, relatively well-known radio host, Nick Wright, one of those sort of hot take artists, talking head types, they were on there together. They're talking about the upcoming NFL draft, and I mean a year from now. They kind of were stumbling on Carson Beck, and Cowherd dismissed him in a very strange way. You've heard us play this before, but it's needed context for what we're about to say today, so let's let you hear it one more time.
Shedeur Sanders, the kid Cam Ward at Miami, who's pretty interesting. There's a kid Notre Dame got a transfer who's pretty interesting.
No, and Quinn Ewers, people like him, and then there's one more that we're forgetting. That's the guy who's most likely to go number one. I talked to him on the show today, so see if I can remember it. But I was just about to look like, hold on a second. Oh, Carson Beck is the other one, the kid from Georgia that people something. Yeah.
I don't think he's a top five pick. I think he's he's Georgia good.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, so as we said before, we have no idea what Georgia good even means, but I would say that whatever Georgia good is has been good enough to win national championships and make Stetson Bennett a Heisman finalist. So whatever Georgia good has been plenty good enough. So if Carson Beck for this upcoming year is Georgia good, and as we said before, then we think that Georgia could be just fine because Georgia good is plenty good enough. But the overall kind of theme of that clip that you've heard us play from Colin Cowherd before is that somehow that there's a level of stardom and fame and notoriety that a guy like Carson Beck just doesn't have. That he's just not well known enough to be in the kind of conversation that, oh my gosh, Caleb Williams or whatever, Bryce Young, one of these previous quarterbacks would have had. That's some of what's being said here is like, Carson Beck, I guess. And, this idea that Beck and some of his quarterback, counterparts for this upcoming season are somewhat lacking in star power, it's apparently not just Colin Cowherd who believes in that. And what made me think about the Cowherd clip was something that I read from David Hale in ESPN.com. And what I'm about to read to you is ultimately going to be very complimentary for Beck and some other quarterbacks along with Beck. But are you familiar with the phrase damning someone with faint praise, or the idea of a backhanded compliment? There's a certain aspect of this that sort of feels a little bit like a backhanded compliment, or a little bit like you're kind of damning Beck and other guys that, like Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe, with a certain level of faint praise of, yeah, I mean, I guess they're the best we have for this upcoming season. It's a very, very strange narrative. ESPN, David Hale, the writer, looking at the various tiers of quarterbacks in college football, from like the top all the way down to like 133, 134, whatever, like the lowest, however many teams there are now. This is like from the entire country, from the top all the way down to the bottom. And Carson Beck was in the top tier of quarterbacks. But as David Hale writes about Beck and the other so-called top-tier guys, there's a certain lack of enthusiasm that he seems to have about what this crop of quarterbacks, I guess, can be. Perhaps David Hale, hard to impress. Let me read this quote to you. This is from ESPN.com. And in discussing the top-tier quarterbacks, this is what David Hale says. He says, "You're probably not alone if you're looking at this group," meaning the other top-tier players, and asking yourself a simple question. Really? These guys, he asks. He goes on to say, this is David Hale, ESPN, Beck might be next year's number 1 overall pick, but he certainly wasn't the biggest talent on his own offense last year. Milroe was benched at one point last season after week 3. And then he says, after week 3, Quinn Ewers had just 3 games with multiple touchdown passes. Gabriel has been prolific for years, but has he ever really been great? This is David Hale kind of poo-pooing his own list here of the so-called top-tier quarterbacks in college football here this season. Now, my point here for a moment is not to say Carson Beck's not getting enough credit from this guy from ESPN.com. That's not really my point. My point is that it seems like to me a lot of the guys who end up being the best quarterbacks in a given year are not necessarily guys that you would necessarily predict that for in any given season. It just doesn't quite seem like that's always the way that it goes. I mean, the best example of this overall might be Joe Burrow. I think a lot of us would say that Joe Burrow may be, and probably is, the best single-season quarterback I've ever seen. And perhaps you would say the same thing for yourself, that this is the best, individual player, individual season that any college quarterback has ever had. But Burrow was also the starter in 2018, the year before he became that guy in 2019. And a lot of us were in Baton Rouge the day that Georgia lost LSU, and that was not a good day for Georgia. But in terms of watching Joe Burrow that day, I don't know how many of us at the time are like, man, we are seeing a historic figure. We are seeing the Babe Ruth of college football right here in front of our eyes here. And, boy, there's no telling the kind of historic stats he's going to put up next season. That obviously came true for Joe Burrow in 2019. But when a lot of us saw him in 2018, I don't know how many of us were necessarily predicting that to happen, because college football has a way of being surprising. Burrow was a good, solid starter on a good, solid team for LSU in 2018. And in 2019, this became the most explosive offense of most of our lifetimes. And that's just sort of what college football is. It's perhaps not always as extreme as the Joe Burrow case, but it often provides a little bit of room for surprise. Like lesser examples, but still somewhat relevant, guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix this past year, Pac-12 quarterbacks, former transfers who became, first-round picks and really high first-round picks in this year's NFL draft in a way that would have perhaps not been predicted for them in the past. That college football is just one of those things where experienced quarterbacks, especially lately, you want to go back to like the Johnny Manziel, Jameis Winston, that era, you saw a lot of freshmen and redshirt freshman quarterbacks having great success. I would say that in recent years, the quarterback position has become a little bit more of an experienced position, and some of the guys who've leaned on their experience have gotten better in a way that you could not always predict. So this idea that somehow Beck, or even like, don't even make this about Carson, make this about Dylan Gabriel, or make this about Jalen Milroe, who, to be honest, I'm not all that in love with this quarterback, but nonetheless, he's in this group. Make this even be about Quinn Ewers. For all of these guys, that there is a level of fame and success they could achieve this year that's not always foreshadowed by what they've done in the past. So from that standpoint, I think that David Hale probably doesn't quite get this right. But what we care about here, what you care about is, of the group of so-called Tier 1 quarterbacks, which ESPN does put Carson Beck in, could Carson Beck kind of work his way to the front? Could he kind of fight off Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe and all these other guys? And could he truly become the best quarterback in the sport here this year? Number 1 overall pick, maybe wins the Heisman Trophy, and for our audience and myself in particular, most important of all, lead Georgia to another national championship? The answer to that question is, of course, yes. And in this story, even though it sort of starts with a little bit of a weird premise from David Hale at ESPN.com, there is a simple stat that Hale puts in his article that I do think sort of tells the tale of, gosh, if you gave me one thing that could be true about my team's quarterback, this is the sort of thing that I do want to be true. This is the sort of thing that if I'm going to bet on a guy, just not necessarily betting money, but just sort of bet on a guy with my belief, if I'm going to bet on a guy, this is the kind of thing I want to be true of the quarterback that I'm putting my faith and trust in. And this is one of the stats, and I'll show this to you on the screen, that Hale gave about Carson Beck as to why he's sort of in the Tier 1 for this upcoming season. And to me, this may be the simple stat that kind of proves why he could step head and shoulders out in front of everybody else in the same group with him, is that last year when he was playing teams that were ranked at the time the game was played, that Beck's overall QBR was 92, which is a good number. His completion percentage was 74%. Of course, that's a good number. He was 13 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions and 10.02 yards per attempt. That sort of 10-plus yard per attempt number, that'd be, put him at the top for like national, near the top for national best in any given year. And last year, Beck put those numbers up against teams that were ranked when Georgia was playing them. So a great touchdown-to-interception ratio, a great completion percentage, a high QBR. Carson Beck really thriving last year against opponents that were ranked when Georgia was playing them. And obviously that's important for this year because, as we talked about yesterday, Georgia's playing an extremely difficult schedule. Georgia's going to be playing in some of the most high-profile games in all of college football for the upcoming season. So the fact that Beck has already thrived against top-flight competition in 2023, to me, only foreshadows the kind of success he could have in 2024. So if you want to have a reason to believe that of the group that includes a Dylan Gabriel at Oregon or whoever Ohio State ends up starting, or Jalen Milroe, or certainly Quinn Ewers, who I do think can be a pretty good quarterback, if you want to have reason to believe that Beck can step out in front of all of those guys and end up being better than the rest, it's that performance against ranked opponents that, to me, sort of gets that done. Now, it's also true that last week when Kirby Smart was at SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida, and by the way, we'll talk to Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment about his own experience there in Destin with the rest of the SEC bigwigs. But when Kirby was there last week, he was kind of being asked, okay, with all the expectations that are in place for Carson, we just talked about some of those, what does Kirby think that Carson needs to do to sort of take that next step as a player? And Kirby gave a pretty clear answer about all of that. This is Kirby on Carson Beck going back to last week.
Yeah, his leadership of the wide out in the offense. I mean, he was in complete command of it, but there was times that I think he knows that he can say, you know what, I can step up and be a bigger voice and a bigger leader. We had a lot of veteran players on that offense last year that had played a lot more than him. Now we don't. He is the veteran that has played the most and that has the most command, and he'll do a good job doing that.
So that's Kirby Smart there on the subject of Carson Beck becoming more of a leader. When we talk to Jake Fromm a little bit later on, I'm going to talk to Jake in particular as a guy who had to also take that step during his college career. I'm going to ask him, what's that like when you have to sort of, especially as a veteran quarterback, now step up and speak even louder, even more clearly about where you want to see your team go. Someone who's done that before for Georgia, Jake Fromm, will tell us about that a little bit later on the show. But my sort of final point on this for now is simply this, is that if the challenge is there from your head coach to be a bigger leader and to lead your wide receivers in particular, the fact that you've got the skill set in place that allows them to get to where they want to go, the NFL along with you, a future high draft pick, much the same way that Carson Beck hopes that he can be, the ability that Carson Beck has to impact their own seasons and their own statistical success and their own NFL draft future. That makes the mantle of leadership that Beck's hoping to aspire to that much easier to achieve, because as they see Carson taking steps with his own game, the players around Beck in this Georgia offense will see him as the guy that can also get them to where they want to go there as well. As we said before, nothing proves that more than what Carson did a year ago in some of the biggest games that Georgia played. So if you want to have that reason to understand and that reason to believe why Carson Beck truly could be college football's best quarterback here in 2024, the guy from ESPN says it pretty well. Beck was very good last year against ranked opponents. The toughest games that Georgia played, well, there are a lot of those in place for 2024, and the expectation is Carson Beck could be even better here this year. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Across all platforms, video 10 a.m., radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts wherever you find them there as well. For our folks there checking in on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed to our DawgNation YouTube page, man, we'd love to have you do that. Obviously, we appreciate you watching DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management each and every day. But for the other really good stuff that's out there, in fact, our buddy Cody Chaffins, who's working as one of our producers here today, he had another great video piece up on Charlie Conant. If you haven't seen that yet, best place to get that is there at the DawgNation YouTube page. A lot of good stuff in addition to just the live shows. You can get that from our DawgNation YouTube page, so subscribe there if you have not done that already. By the way, big thanks to Breda Pest Management who make today's show possible. You know, Breda Pest Management is the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means there's nobody more excited about Georgia in the Super Regional college baseball coming up this weekend more than our buddy Matt Breda and the entire team there at Breda Pest Management. So as you're there at Foley Field, if you're lucky enough to be there this weekend, wondering, hey, how does this place stay bug and critter free? How does this place stay termite free? It's our folks there at Breda Pest Management who make that happen. They're providing that protection there to Foley Field, and they can provide the same level of protection to your home there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So when you work with Breda, you not only get the prestige and the kind of, the sort of sense of pride that comes from working with the same company that UGA trusts, but they're also going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that switch. So maybe you've been working with think of a sort of a fly-by-night company, and their cost of service is going up, the quality of service you're getting is going down. With our friends at Breda Pest Management, that's not going to be the case. They're going to save you money. They're going to deliver the great service they've been famous for since 1975. Got 125 employees stretched across our market area. Every day I'm driving around, I'm always seeing those Breda trucks, those Breda vehicles out taking good care of people, and they want to take care of you as well. So please find them online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com. Breda Pest Management is the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. All right, we got a lot we're going to do here, including looking at a really fun picture that's going to come out of the Georgia program here in just a moment. But prior to that, though, I want to give you another quick reminder that we are coming down to the end for our DawgNation Invasion giveaway, courtesy of our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. A lot of y'all know we are invading Austin, Texas in October for one of the biggest games that Georgia has played. Obviously, a lot of you are going to get a chance to be there with us, and one lucky winner is going to win their way into the stadium for the game there that day, but also a couple-night hotel stay right there in Austin, a couple of passes to the Friday night football party with DawgNation prior to the game, and the big, inclusive, all-inclusive DawgNation Invasion tailgate there on that Saturday. Those are all of the details here of everything the winner's going to get: a couple-night hotel, tickets to the game, passes to the Friday night party, a couple of tickets to the DawgNation Invasion tailgate. But we're down to the very final couple of hours here. 11:59 tonight, registration for the contest is going to close. So if you haven't gotten in for your chance to win, do that right now. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. All right. Two great guests for us today. It's Jake Fromm coming up in a moment, as we said, and as we also promised, Mike Griffith coming up in just a couple of minutes there as well. But prior to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, and it is great to have Georgia Farm Bureau back with us here again on DawgNation Daily. They've been longtime friends of ours and involved in a lot of the stuff that we're doing. I love the local support they provide to their communities and just a great way they take care of people when it comes to insurance needs. So good to have Georgia Farm Bureau back with us again today on Around the Doghouse here. And I want to show you this if you're watching on video. If you're not, I'll describe it to you. A really fun photo that Nate Frazier shared. Now, Frazier is one of the rare, at least now, signees for Georgia, and that Frazier finished out his full senior year out in California before arriving at UGA. But he is here now, and obviously I think Frazier's got big expectations for the upcoming season. But as Frazier kind of points out, there's a lot of excitement in place for the other freshman running backs there too. And you love to see the camaraderie already forming here as Frazier shares on social media a picture of himself with Chauncey Bowens and also Dwight Phillips, the other freshman running back that Georgia signs, the speedster from Pebblebrook here in the state of Georgia. All three of those together, Nate Frazier on X saying, oh, yeah, it's real, that trio. So obviously loving the idea of all these freshman running backs coming in together. It was a great photo. You may have read a story about this at DawgNation.com, or maybe you've seen the photo on social media yourself. Really very good stuff and a great reminder of just how impressive this freshman crop of running backs could end up being for Georgia. In fact, probably worth going back in time to December when all three of these guys originally signed with Georgia, what Kirby Smart thought this group kind of brought to the table at what is right now, I think, for Georgia, a little bit of a position of need. This is what Kirby said about these freshman running backs if you want to go back to December.
Yeah, they complement each other. You know, they're very different. You know, you got the James Cook, Zamir White, the Sony Nick complementary package there, and Dwight's completely different altogether. I mean, he is very unique skill set, very elite skill set, but how we use him will be very important because he's not, you know, just a normal back. He can do a lot of things. He can create a lot of matchup nightmares, and we don't think he's even seen his full potential. And the other two kids complement each other really well and give us big backs. You know, all three of those guys run sub 1,100 meters, which sub 11 is rolling, and they're big. And so we feel really good about those guys.
Yeah, so obviously Bowen's the guy we've seen a little bit. Kirby talking about Dwight Phillips there. And to be totally honest, I know Dwight's dealt with a little bit of an injury, so I'm curious on Dwight's case how healthy he is, and then also what Georgia creatively can do to perhaps get him involved in the offense. And I don't know if that's in 2024 or not. There's only, you know, so many footballs to go around. So I don't know if Phillips gets that opportunity here in 2024, but in some future, maybe it is this upcoming season, but in some future year, a guy like this, and Kirby says that, hey, they're all moving. They're all speedsters. But Dwight Phillips is like a different level of speedster, and a lot of high school coaches were very, very clear in telling me just how intimidating his speed can be in a lot of different phases of the game when he was healthy and playing, for Pebblebrook. And so Georgia getting really creative about how it uses a guy like Phillips in future years, I think could be a really interesting thing. It's one of those kind of gadget type guys that gives you a chance, and Mike Bobo certainly likes getting into his bag and getting really, really creative. A guy like Phillips perhaps gives you a chance to do that. As far as this upcoming year goes, though, it's the guy who shared the photo we were just talking about who may have the most interesting outlook of all. And that's not to disrespect a guy like Chauncey Bowens, but the truth is, Frazier may just be the most complete of the incoming freshman running backs for UGA, and one of those guys who has a chance, along with what we expect Rod Robinson to be able to do, and obviously Trevor Etienne to be able to do. Nate Frazier has a chance to kind of work his way into that conversation for playing time this year, especially given the fact that Branson Robinson is kind of coming back from an injury of his own here right now. So, the mindset that Frazier approaches this upcoming fall camp is going to really matter. And we believe that Frazier's mindset is obviously exactly where it needs to be, because you want to go back a few weeks ago, he was on Before the Hedges with Jeff Sintel, our DawgNation recruiting show that airs on Wednesday night. And Frazier, in making it clear why it is that he chose UGA, gives you a little bit of the idea of the energy that he'll be bringing to his first season on campus, and some of that kind of shining through in the photo that you just saw. This is Frazier going back a few weeks ago, talking about what it was about Georgia that he liked and the excitement level he has about getting his career started with these Dogs. This is Nate Frazier.
You guys want me to be so honest? The first I give it the first 30 minutes to an hour when I stepped on the campus. Like, it was just a feeling walking in the stadium, just, it's going to be 90,000 people action-packed. The history behind it, the coaches, make it felt like a second home. It's honestly, it was probably like the first hour to 30 minutes in my head. I'm like, yeah, this is where I belong. Like, I felt bad because I would like communicate with coaches and other coaches and be like, yeah, yes, sir, coach, this and this. But I knew deep down inside, I'm like, I'm not going to no other school, man. Like, Georgia, it just felt like home the first visit. And I told Coach McGee that when he was there, I'm like, don't be surprised, Coach, if I give it a month or two that I just go, release it to the public and stuff like that. But honestly, it was the first thing. It's just like everything was right. Besides football, if we're not talking football, academically, it's one of the hardest schools to get to into the country. Having that University of Georgia on your resume as well, because a lot of athletes don't think about plan Bs. I'm a person that think about plan B. Of course, that's not my main option of a plan B. I always stick to my plan A because that's what I'm pushing forward to. But you always have to think about a plan B. And so having University of Georgia on your resume can get you a lot of places and open a lot of doors for you as well. So as far as the football part, it has a great academic part as well.
So a great level of energy there from Nate Frazier, a lot of excitement for him about coming to Georgia, and a lot of excitement from Georgia fans about what he might be able to do in his first year at Georgia. And it's kind of nice to think about this entire crop of freshman running backs, what they could have in store in their Georgia career, and that's a fun photo to kind of get us thinking about all of that. And that's also around the Doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And as I said before, we're so happy to have Georgia Farm Bureau back with us here around the Doghouse on DawgNation Daily because of the service that they provide to so many of the folks in our audience. Think about car insurance here for a moment. Of course, you have to have car insurance. It's like a legal thing, right? You got to be able to have that to have a drive, to be able to drive. But our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau understand, well, you've got all kinds of options about where you could get your auto insurance from. And that's why we say, why not work with a company that's working with communities just like yours here in the great state of Georgia? I'm talking about investing dollars back into those communities, being a great citizen in those communities, and supporting things like locally grown food and the sort of agriculture that has made the state of Georgia so famous and so loved for such a long time. That is what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about, insurance that you can feel good about. And if you want to feel good about your insurance company, then you need to make the switch to Georgia Farm Bureau here today. So why don't you give them a call? It's 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050 or gfbinsurance.com. That's the website, gfbinsurance.com. We love the folks at Georgia Farm Bureau, and we're so happy to have their quality of service and their commitment to our state back here around the Doghouse on DawgNation Daily here today. Now, speaking of the great state of Georgia, we'll have one of Georgia's own coming up here in a little bit, the former quarterback Jake Fromm. But also, it's always a fun time on a Wednesday to catch up with Mike Griffith, especially with everything happening around Georgia here right now. So let's do all of that here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Our buddy Mike Griffith right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot happening around Georgia here at the moment, and some of that obviously going back into last week. SEC spring meetings, Destin, Florida. Did not get a chance to talk to Mike about that last week, so I want to kind of begin our conversation with that here today. Mike, it was kind of an interesting time, and it sort of felt like to me, and I'll let you tell me more your feeling on the ground on this, it sort of felt like we were kind of in that still sort of waiting game thing where for a good while now, the SEC has sort of had this thing of just sort of waiting for what's coming next. And in some cases, it almost like never gets here. Like, for instance, you and I have talked plenty in the past about, I'm sure this time a year ago, we were definitely talking 8-game conference schedule, 9-game conference schedule. It sort of seems like for now that topic's just sort of disappeared because nobody really knows what the SEC is going to look like or college football is going to look like. We have an idea, but some of this hasn't quite fallen into place yet. So this is kind of a long-winded way of asking, what was the mood like last week around SEC spring meetings, knowing that there is so much uncertainty for college athletics overall?
Yeah, electricity. And Brandon, you captured it. Kirby Smart said the same thing. The most pressing issues that the league has faced in the 9 years that Kirby's been there. So Kirby had a great presentation. You heard Lane Kiffin say he felt like Kirby kind of came to the forefront of the room now with Nick Saban not being there. Kirby, of course, the second longest tenured coach in the SEC, only Mark Stoops has been there longer. And, oh, by the way, Kentucky still hasn't won a divisional title, and this guy's got a long tenure, which tells you everything you need to know about Kentucky basketball. But three things really emerged, I felt. Obviously the quote-unquote settlement, the landmark settlement, whereby there's going to be some, I guess, restitution, if that's the right word, for past athletes that perhaps should have had value, NIL value at some point, part of a quote-unquote settlement. Misleading term, though. There's nothing settled about this. Sankey made that very apparent. Greg Sankey, the commissioner, at the very beginning. This is just the beginning. This is a step in the direction of what's to come. Anticipate more lawsuits and more court action that, will have fans rolling their eyes and, a lot of coaches turning in their graves. What did come out of it was talk about the feasibility of limiting teams to 85 players, which could eliminate walk-ons. Yep. And maybe even lower-ranked recruits like the Kirby Smarts and the Ladd McConkeys, guys that wouldn't normally get a chance. Because if you're only going to have 85 guys on your roster, not on scholarship, on your roster, then you're not going to take a chance on a developmental player. Eric Stokes, another notable former redshirt that grew into a first-round pick. Kirby Smart, the last scholarship in his class. Ladd McConkey, the last scholarship in his respective class. So a lot of coaches took up for the players. Talked with Josh Brooks. He says, look, we don't need to be putting this on the backs of the student athletes. This has got to be solved a different way. So there's some strong opinions out there on that, BA. Also, the proliferation of legalized gambling has put a lot of pressure on these student athletes and their families as the Sharpies look for inside information. So now there's some talk about an availability report, how you would go about that, how we'd enforce that. The addition of Oklahoma and Texas brought a new level of energy. It's not like these are fledgling programs. You remember the Big Ten added Rutgers and Maryland and didn't cost much of a blink in the public, albeit increased the Big Ten's television footprint by 33% and proved very valuable. Texas and Oklahoma, meanwhile, bring a lot of tradition and a lot more competition. Look at College World Series of women's softball, and those are the two teams playing for it. Texas among the favorites this year. Oklahoma, the rich tradition, certainly the Rose Bowl game with Georgia comes to mind. So there was a lot of buzz about those three things at the spring meetings, albeit, as you said, not a lot solved. And as for the 8 or the 9 game schedule, Kirby just came out and said it. Kirby typically doesn't like to talk for anyone but himself, but I think he needed to kind of call out the elephant in the room. He said it's as simple as this. If playing a 9 game SEC schedule helps the SEC teams get more team in the playoffs, do it. If it doesn't, then why bother? What's the point of it? Now, I do realize there may be some more television incentive dollars behind this. If they go to a 9 game schedule, it would add some value to that television package. But even then, you've got to measure that about how many teams you're going to get in the playoff. Does a 3-loss Georgia, for example, maybe not the best example. I don't see 3 losses. Let's say, does a 3-loss Missouri get in ahead of a 2-loss Clemson? And that's where you evaluate the value of playing SEC competition versus ACC competition. We just don't know what the 13-member NCAA selection committee is going to do, and that needs to kind of be borne out this year in the first year of the 12-team playoff.
So you mentioned something a moment ago about what Lane Kiffin said. And it's with Kiffin sometimes sort of hard to know if he's joking or not, but about Kirby kind of taking over the coaches' meeting in the absence of Nick Saban. Obviously, he is the most successful, and as you kind of pointed out, one of the more senior members in the SEC here right now. But here's the thing I'm curious about, and I would say that Kirby's well within his right to sort of feel however he wants to feel on this. If he just wants to focus on his own job and winning as much as he can, well, obviously that's what he's paid to do, so it would make sense that he might feel that way. But the point I'm getting to is, and I said this yesterday during a radio interview that I was doing, I don't know that I'm sure that Kirby Smart wants to be the leader of college football. And if he doesn't want to, he doesn't have any right to, he has a right to just be good at his job and be the best coach. But the sort of outspoken leader of this is the direction this needs to go and here's what's not good. The famous line that Nick Saban once gave about, high-tempo offense, which eventually he kind of adopted, but this idea of, are we sure this is what we want college football to be? Like, I don't know how much Kirby Smart wants to be the guy that looks around and says, are we sure this is what we want college football to be? I can't quite get the sense of that. Mike, how outspoken as a leader for the sport do you think Kirby wants to be?
Well, I don't know that he wants to be, Brandon, as much as Kirby feels a responsibility to the SEC to provide some good leadership and some good ideas. You remember a couple of years ago, he served on a rules committee that would help shape the future of the sport. So I do think Kirby does feel a responsibility to the sport, and he does have a level of expertise that, let's face it, he's the best out there. He's got tremendous experience. He's been so many different places. I know the low hanging fruit is for people to say he's just, one of Nick Saban's guys. And that couldn't be further from the truth when you look at his experience as a player, something that Nick Saban never really had at the big time level. When you look at the fact that Kirby played under two coaches at Georgia that are both of Hall of Fame merit. Everybody forgets Ray Goff was once an SEC Player of the Year and a very valuable member of the Vince Dooley staff who recruited Kirby Smart as well as Will Muschamp and a lot of other guys. I know the results on the field don't necessarily reflect the impact that Coach Goff had. And then Jim Donnan came along and led another chapter, and Kirby had an opportunity to play for those two coaches. And then he had an opportunity to coach under Bobby Bowden. And that year at Florida State was invaluable. And then he coached under Mark Richt. He was a running backs coach, and he coached in the NFL. And of course, the time with Saban was valuable as a coordinator and as the lead recruiter that helped build 4 national championship teams. I think when we look at Kirby's teams, we certainly give an assist to guys like Dan Lanning and the former offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, that's now in the NFL. You can't do it alone. And Kirby was absolute rock star helping to build Alabama. And now what he's done at Georgia in an era that's just so different. And certainly some lessons from Nick Saban have been applied, Brandon. But in the last 9 years, college football has changed so much. Kirby had to learn roster management on his own. And he manages his team his own way. This is all Georgia now. And there may be a touch of Nick Saban here and there in Kirby's techniques, but a lot of this is Kirby Smart, a guy with a business acumen and a degree, former all-SEC academic guy. And so this is a very intelligent man who's way ahead in the sport, and I think does feel some responsibility to provide leadership when asked. He's not going to go out of his way to make headlines. We know that. But when he stands in front of the room and people ask him about the issues that are confronting the SEC, there's no one more qualified or capable to speak than Kirby Smart.
I want to ask you about one more thing here, then I want to talk about baseball to conclude our conversation. But I have a little bit of a theory about the SEC moving forward, which is as the league gets bigger, both geographically and now adding 2 more teams, and who knows what's coming in the future. The days of everybody agreeing on everything are probably over. Like you think about the Mike Slive era, and I know you covered this league through the Mike Slive era. The thing that Slive was really good at was people weren't dropping dimes on each other anymore. Nobody was turning in any, people stopped turning in other teams of the SEC. Like there was this sense of like, hey, we're all in this together. And when you got the same geographic location and everybody sort of touches each other from a border standpoint, it's probably a little easier to see some kinship there. Well, now the league is very, very big. And Austin, Texas is sort of a long way away from Athens, Georgia, just to use an example here. And it sort of seems like whether it be not agreeing on what the schedule should be or Jaden Rashad is suing Billy Napier or kind of different viewpoints on like what's better for me as a big program or what's better for me as a somewhat lesser program. I think the days of everybody agreeing on stuff in the SEC are just probably over. There are a lot of very different stakeholders in this league now. So my question is, with Texas and Oklahoma now here at this event that you were at last week in Destin, did the overall feel of the event feel different because there are just so many different viewpoints in the old school, 12-team SEC that Mike Slive led to prominence?
Well, a couple things. I got to give you a Spurrier quip that I thought was somewhat ironic on Jaden Rashada. He said, he pointed out Charlie Pell, a former Florida coach, got in trouble for paying a player. He said, now we got a coach in trouble for not paying a player. Just kind of a sign of the times there from the old ball coach there. Interestingly enough, while there are some differences of opinions on the 8 and 9 game schedule, and like I said, I think Kirby came up with the answer that most everyone has to agree with. What's in the best interest of the league? They're all on board on the 85-man limit. None of these coaches want to see the walk-ons go away. Now, smaller programs that aren't as well funded, I could see them because what they recognize is this, Brandon. If the superpower conference teams, the SEC and the Big Ten, continue to have a 130-man roster, they're going to be relegated to being developmental leagues. That's what's going to happen to the MAC and Conference USA and even the Mountain West to some extent. And listen, I had an interesting conversation with Jamie Chadwell at the Spurrier Award earlier this year. and he's got an extremely talented quarterback. And he said, listen, I'm not even talking to this guy about his senior year. And a lot of these super talented guys that come here to Liberty, I tell them, here's what you do, man. You star here for 3 years, and then you go get the bag at the big school that 4th year. They understand the dynamics that are going on right now and understand what they need to do to get the quality kids. They can put them on the field sooner. That is their recruiting advantage. They recognize that if a kid has an opportunity to go from Liberty to a place like Georgia or Alabama or Texas, he's got to take it. So we're starting to see the sport shape a little bit in terms of developmental leagues. Certainly, Brandon, you see that with basketball. All you got to do is look at the Georgia basketball roster last year and a lot of where those players came from. And I think you're going to see that trend continue to football. So I didn't sense quite as much division as we've traditionally seen on these issues, because these big issues are dollars. And at the end of the day, these coaches understand they need their coffers full. They're all scrambling to try to figure out how to come up with more NIL money to cover these unintended expenses and situations that are arising. And as for Rashada, I don't think that's really affected Kirby and Billy's relationship. Kirby didn't have any right or place to try to put a veto on that. We're in an era now where these student athletes are governed by commercial law and legislation. The NCAA no longer has the power. Everything goes to the courts. So if Rashada has a case and has reasonable litigation and grounds to sue, it's not the place of his head coach to get in his way. It was a courtesy for Rashada to tell the head coach at Georgia. And then Kirby says, look, it's his family's decision. So I didn't take that as much as Georgia against Florida. A lot of people tried to frame it that Kirby's not behind this. Kirby supports his student athletes and their legal rights.
To kind of finish up here, and I want to squeeze this in and be respectful of your time. So Georgia getting ready to host NC State in the Super Regional starting Saturday. As we've been saying a lot this week, this has been such a fun story and such a welcome addition to most of our sporting summers, I would say. And, obviously a lot has been kind of made about the thrilling win against Army and then the amazingly thrilling game on Sunday night against Georgia Tech. But the truth is, Mike, as a regional host, Georgia never went to the losers bracket, did not have to be extended to Monday. There are plenty of regional hosts who are not nearly as lucky as that. I know the games themselves were close, but the fact that Georgia, kind of sweeps its way through the regional, I think that's a pretty big statement for a team that has not been in that spot. I'm talking about a program. Obviously, it's a first-year coach. But for a program who has not been in that spot for quite some time, the fact that Georgia did march its way through the regional, I think it tells a pretty good tale of this team's chances of now winning the Super Regional and, of course, getting to Omaha. This is a team that has just, I think, really grown up over the course of the season. The sweep against South Carolina and Vanderbilt near the end of the year sort of tells that, and sweeping its way through the NCAA Regional especially tells that. This is a team that I give a real shot to here.
No doubt. 4 of the 5 SEC teams that advanced to Super Regionals are from the SEC East Division. And, boy, what does that say? Remember, though, keep this in mind. NC State also swept through their regional.
True.
NC State played a tougher schedule than Georgia did. Now, common opponents, Georgia 8-0, NC State, I believe, 3-5. Georgia with a higher RPI. When NC State has pitching, Georgia has the hitting. Georgia has the home field advantage. The stage was not too big. The cadets from West Point certainly gave Georgia all they wanted on that Friday game. I thought that was good that Georgia won a game like that. It sent the message that, hey, this is postseason college baseball. Anything can happen. Georgia did earn that number 7 national seed and the fully field advantage. It's huge. Wes Johnson has been there before, even though he's a first-time head coach. His leadership's been amazing. And when you got a player like Charlie Connon, and you got to throw Corey Collins in there, you've got the Jordan and Pippen effect going, and your number 9 hitter has 17 home runs and hits a grand slam Saturday and a game-tying home run in the 9th. There's a lot of depth there. But again, throw caution out there. You've got different umpires working these regionals and supers than have worked it all year long, and it's really important that teams adjust. Georgia pitching has had some struggles. And Charlie Goldstein, one of their top 3 pitchers, may have re-injured himself. Certainly looked like he did. And so the Georgia pitching is a little scarce. So can the hitting overcome the pitching? What's the strike zone going to look like? How's the ball going to bounce? You got a very determined and capable North Carolina State team with a 26-year head coach who's got some World Series experience. One of the interesting stories, the last time NC State went to the World Series in 2021, Brandon, and just a reflection on how the world has changed, they had to forfeit their second game because of COVID.
That's right.
So
I remember that.
You've got a very interesting backstory going on here in Athens. Certainly there's a lot of energy. You probably know the tickets sold out within minutes. There weren't that many to be had. Exciting times. And I'll tell you, I've been fortunate to cover a lot of great Georgia football, some of the best I've ever seen. But that game Sunday night against Georgia Tech was an instant classic that I'd put in my top 5 Georgia game coverages. And that includes some of those great Jake Fromm games. And, let's not let Jake off the hook. We got to remind him one more time he played in the Little League World Series. Maybe we would have liked to have seen him on a Georgia baseball diamond a season.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Mike. That's good stuff. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management here today. Enjoy the baseball here this weekend. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this today, but we've actually talked to Jake about that before, about the fact that, I think that Jake's intention was, I'm going to be, because he was obviously a very good 2-sport star in high school. I'm going to go be a 2-sport star in college. Playing quarterback for Kirby Smart is a pretty full meal to try to eat there. So after that first spring practice, Jake's like, maybe I better focus on football here because that's going to be challenging enough as it is. And Jake, in his own words, has sort of told us that in the past. By the way, speaking of Jake Fromm, we'll be lucky enough to hear from him again coming up in just a moment. We'll get into a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier involving Carson Beck and some of the Georgia quarterback situation, by the way, extending beyond just Beck. We'll do a lot of that with Jake here coming up in a moment. But prior to that, how about cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean? Had a chance to talk to Jeff Sintel a little bit this morning. He is fresh off his own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Just got a chance to see Alaska. And I can't wait to talk to Jeff, more about that on Friday. But the experience that he had there in Alaska, that's a place I've never been before. But I love the idea of taking that Royal Caribbean cruise vacation to Alaska. That'd be a lot of fun. For me, I'm looking ahead to the month of July, near the endish part of the month, middle part of the month, as I get a chance to be among the very first to sail on Utopia of the Seas, the brand new Oasis-class ship. It's set to debut for Royal Caribbean. And, I'm always amazed at the work that's done to kind of construct these ships. And, it's recently kind of set sail from out of its, port where it was, or I should say the shipyard where it was built. Spent a couple days in France, kind of made its way over to Florida here. And so many cool new things are going to be there for Utopia of the Seas. If you're watching a video, you just saw the Ultimate Abyss, the big slide that's there. That's going to be even longer, on this ship. Be the tallest dry slide there at sea, so that's going to be a lot of fun. You also got a chance, if you're watching a video, to see Royal Railway. This is an amazing restaurant concept that truly is unlike anything you've ever seen before, not just on a cruise ship, but perhaps on land there as well. It's kind of like a rail car simulator. So as you're in the restaurant, which kind of looks like a train car, and you've got like the simulation experience that makes it seem like you're kind of rolling down through like the Old West and all these like really cool classic scenes. It's going to be just an amazing, amazing experience. And one of the things that Royal Caribbean just does so well is making everything on the ship sort of feel like a big special event. They're so good at that. So I want you to talk to Jessica Slater. She's a great travel agent. She can help you get booked up on your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Whether it's Utopia of the Seas or another option for you, give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can tell you more about all of that. All right, a couple of stories for us here today. This involving UGA recruiting, at least to a certain extent. A name you've heard us mention before is Bo Jackson, 4-star running back. Georgia recently got a chance to host him on an unofficial visit. And yet there'd been a lot of chatter as of late that Jackson was trending the direction of Ohio State. And ultimately that's what happens. Jackson does commit to the Buckeyes yesterday. So, listen, Ohio State actually has put a lot into its running back position, especially for this upcoming season. I mean, thinking about, Henderson and, Quinshon Judkins and what they're going to, try to do with the ground game. So they think they've got a lot to sell with running backs here for now. Jackson, the latest example of that. But for me, what this opens up the conversation about, with Jackson now going to Ohio State, kind of what is next for Georgia, the running back position. One of the things you've heard a little bit as of late is a guy like Bo Walker, who's been committed to Georgia. And there'd been some chatter that maybe he might, have some interest in some pull elsewhere. It seems like some of that may have quieted down at least a little bit for the moment. We'll see if that changes. But the other thing that I think the Georgia fans have really gotten interested in is within the last few weeks, you are definitely hearing more about Georgia and a possible connection to Ousmane Kromah, the running back out of Lee County, than you've heard at any point in time over the course of the last couple of years. And Kromah has been a really good running back in the state of Georgia since he was a freshman. And now it sort of seems like there's just a little bit more of a connection between Georgia and Kromah than there perhaps has been at any point in time in Kromah's, high school career. And look, a lot of times you sort of hear, we don't care about star ratings. We sort of, we are, doing our own evaluations. In the case of Kromah, if you at least listen to like some of the rumor mill and stuff like that, there really may have been some truth to that maybe at one point in time, some colleges had a little bit of a different evaluation of Kromah than his recruiting ranking would perhaps suggest they would have had. But if that was ever true for anybody, it seems like it's no longer true now, that the productivity that he's put up during his Lee County career is kind of speaking for itself right now. And obviously he's going to have a wide range of college options available to him. And it certainly seems like that Georgia's trying to do everything it can to be a factor in that recruitment here right now. Obviously, a guy like Josh Crawford having ties to the Lee County program, certainly an example of that. So a lot of Georgia fans for a couple of years now have wanted Georgia to have, at least by appearances, a better relationship with Ousmane Kromah, and maybe that's the direction that all of this is going here right now. Another story I'm going to give you here for a moment, and this kind of comes out of the SEC spring meetings that Mike and I were talking about a moment ago. Dennis Dodd had an interesting piece about this at CBSSports.com as well, that if you want to go back a couple of months ago, do y'all remember this? We were talking about the 12-team playoff hasn't even started, and yet there's all this chatter, and it was substantive chatter. This was coming from like real sources. Real chatter about expanding the playoff to 14 teams. And the SEC and the Big Ten, they wanted their conference champions to get buys, and they wanted this sort of preferential treatment. There was all this discussion about that. Have you noticed this, and this is what Dodd was writing, that all of that has completely disappeared? That and Greg Sankey, at spring meetings last week, essentially kind of begged off the topic saying, let's see a 12-team playoff before we worry about playoff expansion. I think that Sankey's point of view on that's probably right. But it is interesting, right, that, there was almost universal kind of condemnation of this as an idea. And now it's just sort of disappeared. It's almost like if you follow politics, sometimes there's like a trial balloon. Somebody will sort of float something and like see what the reaction is. And if the reaction's bad, they just sort of pretend that it never even existed. I'm not saying that's what this is, but it sort of felt a little bit like a trial balloon of, hey, what if we expanded to 14? And what if the SEC and the Big Ten got half the spots? Everybody sort of acted like they hated that, and it's kind of disappeared. Sort of what that feels like, although if I had to guess, while we're currently not hearing anything more about a 14-team playoff right now in comparison to the very loud conversation that happened about that a couple of months ago, I believe this may also have a lot to do with the fact that the ACC, as we know it, may be soon to dissolve. Maybe that's why this playoff discussion has been on hold for now. But either way, it's kind of disappeared, and it's probably worth noticing that is true. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and we'll get ready to talk to Jake Fromm as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take is welcoming the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Jake, always great to have you on the program. We hope you're doing well today, and it's nice to see you as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here as well. Thank you, Brandon, for having me.
So I was listening to something that Kirby Smart said the other day. He was talking about, he always has things where he feels like his guys can improve. That's nothing new, right? We know that. But in talking about, Carson Beck, I thought it was interesting that he said one of the ways that he'd like to see him improve is to kind of step up and maybe be a little bit more vocal in how he leads his wide receivers and maybe just the offense overall. And, the idea of being a leader as a quarterback, something you and I have talked about before. And I guess I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is it like when you do realize, okay, well, everybody in the room is sort of looking at me? And in the case of Carson, this is especially true because now he's going into his second year as a starting quarterback. What's it like to kind of put yourself out there and maybe speak up a little bit more and maybe speak a little more loudly than you have in the past? What's it like to be the quarterback and maybe be asked to do that in a way that other positions don't necessarily have that as an expectation?
Yeah, for sure. He's absolutely 100% earned that right, that role, and that respect from his teammates, from his coaches, from his peers, and kind of everybody else in college football. And now this year, especially this summer, when they have the opportunity to go out and do a lot of 7-on-7s without the coaches, he gets that opportunity to really put his touch, his voice, and kind of his spin on a lot of what is happening with the offense when it gets put in, when it gets installed, and then how it gets run out there on the field. So for him, picking up vocally, getting to have his voice on how certain guys are running certain routes, the timing, and how everything just kind of orchestrates as an offense, he'll have that ability this summer. And I think that's a big step in leadership for him happening this summer.
I've seen some of those photos, a little bit of video stuff coming out where he has been working in the offseason with some of these receivers. You touched on that. How much does that help, like the overall camaraderie or the sense of trust? And obviously timing is also a big part of how you play football there as well. Like, how impactful are some of these unofficial coaches aren't there, but we're still getting together? How valuable does some of that time actually truly end up being?
Yeah, I think it's to me, I always looked at it as like a 50-50. It's 50% ball, and it's really 50% coming together, getting with the guys, building chemistry, the camaraderie, getting more depth in relationships. I really got to be more a part of that, in the NFL. And when we'd have our 4-week break before training camp, we'd get together and, you're going out to dinner, you're building relationships with guys, and there's more to it than what just happens on the field. And I think it's great that he's taking ownership of that and stepping up in a leadership role. And I think the fruits of that labor will show up this fall.
This is the time of year in which a lot of lists start coming out. People are being ranked. And for those of us that talk about college football, we like all these things because anytime something's ranked, it gives us something to talk about, which is always kind of a lot of fun. Those of us who just sort of enjoy doing this during what they kind of call the talking season time of year. But one of the things that we see is, okay, well, we rank the individual players, but now we're going to rank the groupings of players. And when you look at Georgia and its total grouping of quarterbacks, both for now and the future, Georgia always ranks really high in situations like this. In fact, there are plenty of people who tell you that Georgia's got the best quarterback room, kind of quarterback situation anywhere in college football because it's Carson now, and it's also Gunnar Stockton and Jaden Rashada, who just transferred in, and obviously Ryan Puglisi. People have nice expectations for him. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective, because when you were at Georgia, you also played with talented quarterbacks. How much did you feed off that? How much do you think the typical quarterback feeds off other good quarterbacks? I mean, obviously the iron sharpens iron. We get that. But in terms of watching athletically what a guy's able to do or cerebrally what he's able to understand, how much did you kind of grow from being around other capable players at your same position?
I mean, it helps tremendously because you get to go out and see a different twist and a different perspective of how the quarterback position gets played. Because not every guy is the same. They all put their own unique twist on it, play to their own skill sets. My freshman year, it was Jacob, how he plays with his big arm and how he's able to sit back on things and really get to see it develop. And then, my sophomore year, it was with Justin and getting to see how he would extend plays and use his legs. And then, getting to watch Stetson do very, very similar, like a blend of the two and extend plays with his legs. And really just Stetson just had no, and he just had no care. Right. And he just, hey, man, if he threw a pick, hey, I don't care. I'm still going to go out and wing this. And so he just had no remorse for consequences. So you get to go and watch and get to see the position get played. And man, when other guys make plays, it fires you up and you want to go out and compete and make a play yourself. So, a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. And that's kind of what they're doing there. And anytime you can put together a good QB room, it's going to be great for the football team. And
you mentioned Stetson's demeanor. Obviously, we all saw that during his career at Georgia. But there is a certain sense of you can't get too worried about what happened the previous moment, whether it be during practice, during a game, or maybe too high in a big moment, because there's always a next thing, and there's, I guess, sort of always an ongoing competition. That there is probably a little bit of something to be said for, can you just be relaxed, comfortable in your own skin, and not kind of judging yourself in every single moment, because obviously there are other capable players and there's only so much playing time to go around at the quarterback spot because you only have one quarterback on the field at any given moment.
Oh, for sure. There only one guy plays. And that's why, man, when you earn that right to be that guy and to play and to take over a football team, it's a big deal. And it's something that you don't wear very lightly. And then, having that mentality, the next play, the last play is not going to define you. And what can I do for the team, for the offense? This play is always a very important factor of how that position gets played.
I want to talk to you about this subject for a moment. And you were like me. You were kind of away last week. And for the most part, it was a very quiet week. Not much happened in terms of the work stuff. But there was one thing that came up that my phone just blew up on. And I don't know if you've had any kind of interactions on this too. When it was announced that the Georgia Tech game was going to be on Black Friday, a day sort of typically reserved for high school football, and also just a different day than we're used to sort of seeing Georgia playing. Huge deal. People kind of reacted to this 100 different ways. So I wanted to ask you about this just for a minute. First of all, just at sort of the simple face value level, as a guy who's used to playing college games on Saturdays, when a game is not on Saturday, I don't know if maybe you don't have any real-world experience with this. Maybe that's not a question that's easy for you to answer. But if you didn't play a game on Saturday, how weird would that be when you're used to the normal cadence of a week that kind of runs from Sunday, sort of slightly off day, rolling into, obviously, the game the next Saturday? How weird would it be to see that moved up by a day?
Yeah, I have two. Obviously, I don't have any college experience with it, but I got a little bit of experience in high school with that, and then I have a little bit of experience in the NFL with that. In high school, I loved playing on Thursday, a day up, normally on Friday, playing on Thursday. It was great. Enjoyed it. Man, you had a long weekend, and I always felt like we as a team could prepare better than whoever else we were playing. In the NFL, playing on Thursday is pretty normal, and it's just a different week. Everybody knows it. And you get simpler game plans, and really it's just kind of, hey, let's just go and run our base stuff and go out and play. So I'm really curious to see how Kirby uses this week and the difference in how he prepares and what kind of stuff they'll throw out there on offense, whether or not that'd be, extravagant or just really plain and simple, and just say, hey, we're just gonna beat you straight up. So very curious to see what we're gonna get from them. But I as opinion wise, I don't know how I feel about it. I'm kind of in the camp of, hey, let's just see how this plays out. This could be a really cool thing. I believe the game's played at night. Could kind of get a different tradition going. I'm curious to see how this plays out. I think it'll be a neat and fun twist. And hopefully everybody enjoys it.
Well, the other thing that people reacted to is that's normally a very big, high school football playoff weekend. Yep. Now, it has been announced since then they're going to take that week off and push the playoffs back. The month of November being a little longer gives them a little bit more space to do that because there's 5 Saturdays, 5 weekends in November this year. But, this is one of those things, Jake, where, like, in Georgia, high school football is kind of a sacred thing. And for the most part, Georgia football and Georgia high school football haven't kind of intertwined very much. But we're seeing a lot more games being played on Friday nights now. The Big Ten's doing a lot of that this fall. That, this idea that these Friday nights for high school football being protected turf, I don't know how much longer in the future we can guarantee that to be the case, because we're seeing a lot more Friday night games than have in the last couple of years.
Yeah, sadly, it's going to go wherever the money's at. And if they got an opportunity to put something on TV on Friday night on these kind of holiday-ish kind of nights, they're going to do it. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. But you're exactly right about Friday nights, and especially that week being sacred. I remember, being in high school, making it a deep run into the playoffs. There's just something about that week, because you're off of school. It's Thanksgiving break. You go practice in the mornings to do whatever you want, deer hunt in the afternoon. And then, when Thursday, Thanksgiving Day rolls around, you practice with your guys, and everybody's going off, with each other to Thanksgiving. And that's just a super sacred week. And I remember loving it. And I guess it's going to change a little bit coming this year. It's
like the old saying, you've had a good season if you're practicing on Thanksgiving. That was like the one sort of first goal a lot of teams had was, let's practice on Thanksgiving Day.
100%. I remember Coach Laster, my high school football coach, used to always say there ain't nothing like a practice on Thanksgiving morning. So I still have those memories, still remember them, and going to cherish them for a long time.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily today. And, of course, keep your eyes on Kroger and that membership opportunity known as Kroger Boost. You want more money to enjoy this summer for the things you love and more time to enjoy that? Kroger Boost gives you all of that, because you can get free grocery delivery. You don't have to go all over town trying to get there and get your stuff. Let the folks from Kroger bring it right there to you. That's one of the benefits you get when you're a Kroger Boost member. You can also earn twice the fuel points on every dollar you spend at your local Kroger there, too. Anything we can do to save money at the pump these days, always a smart thing to do. That's what the Kroger Boost membership opportunity gives you a chance to enjoy. So find out more online, Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost for a lot more on that. Jake, one more point I wanted to hit with you before we said goodbye to you here today. There has been some talk, there was the big settlement the other day about more money coming to the ways of players, which we're obviously not against. More compensation seems like a good thing for the players who are out there playing football. But as kind of a counterbalance to that, there's also been some talk, and none of this is official. We don't know where this is going yet, but it's been one of the ideas floated that is a way of making sure that, I guess, the budget stay in line is you may have to reduce the size of rosters in order to make sure that everybody's on the roster can get paid. Not at a place like Georgia, because Georgia's made of money, but some of these places that have a little less money, they may be wanting to do that, which might kind of, I guess if you want to say it in the most fatalistic way possible, it might bring an end to kind of walk-ons as we've known them. And in a place like Georgia, walk-ons have become heroes. And in other places, walk-ons have certainly gotten a chance to play and get an education and make a name for themselves and build a life because of the fact they were willing to work hard and do something hard to earn some time on a playing field. How much do you think would be lost from college football if this concept of a walk-on, as we've understood it, goes away?
Yeah, we've mentioned practicing on Thanksgiving week and that practicing on Thanksgiving Day being sacred. I think there's something sacred about those walk-on opportunities and earning a scholarship and earning time on the field. And when you kind of see that go away, it saddens my heart a little bit to see that, because those are great opportunities for guys. And it's very tough. You lose great opportunities, and then I guess maybe the theory of what they're thinking is to get more competition throughout college football atmosphere. So that's another thing we're just going to have to kind of wait and see and how it works out. But it does sadden my heart a little bit to hear that, because just from some of the guys that I know, of just how much that meant to them, especially one, just being there and being on the team, and then two, earning that scholarship. That was such a big deal for them and their families as well. So we'll just have to see how that goes.
Complicated issues, a lot to sift through for college athletics in the near future. Jake, thanks so much for your time today. We always appreciate that, and we'll look forward to talking to you again as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take again very soon right here on DawgNation Daily.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon.
Great stuff as a part of Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm. And speaking of your local Kroger, that's also a great place to go to pick up some of the brand new Dr. Pepper flavor known as Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. Dr. Pepper in recent years, and y'all know Dr. Pepper is one of my favorites, but in recent years, one of the things they've become kind of famous for are these very creative flavors they've introduced. And for this summer, nothing more perfect than the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut. Just sort of a coastal vibe, kind of a Caribbean, very summertime vibe here. Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut, Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. At your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your grocery shopping, make sure you try some Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar today. So as we say goodbye here, a golden shoe, and this is not for drinking Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut. This is for drinking something very, very different. But our buddy Ness Baldazan, who is known as Dog Cruiser on X because he's a big part of our DawgNation Cruises and has been, recently celebrating his birthday and enjoying some UGA-themed beverages here. First of all, how about the big G on the side of the glass there? Also his name, Nestor. It's funny. I see a little tiny piece of birthday cake, like right there in the corner of the picture, but very, very prominently, a couple of glasses there, what appears to be a couple of bottles of Blanton's bourbon, the unmistakable horse on the top of the bottle there kind of gives that away. Great to see there on that. A very, very happy birthday, it appears, for our buddy Ness Baldazan. So, Nestor, happy birthday to you, and a golden shoe coming your way for all of that. Lousy, stinking Gators, nothing for them to toast here right now. They certainly don't get any Blanton's bourbon. It's been 1,306 days since they have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs, and that is a number that we bask in the glory of seeing increase with each and every passing day. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll see all of you back here again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. That is what R.S. Andrews is all about. All right, we're going to get your comments here. We will probably not go, I would say, crazy long today. We have a little bit of a longer show, not necessarily intending for it to be. Sometimes it just goes that way. And that's kind of what happened to us here today. So with that said, let's find out what's happening on YouTube here for a moment. And we'll say hello to everybody else. Of course, a lot of folks excited about baseball coming up this weekend and just general summer frivolity. Let us see what else. Let us see. Charles Ross, how about this? Talk about problematic behavior. He says his 2-year-old does the Gator chomp when he wants to see Baby Shark. Y'all know the Baby Shark do. He says, I might just have to throw him out, which is very, very funny. So it's like one time I remember being in a game, and I saw a kid, like school-age kid, and the kid was doing the Gator chomp. It's funny how your brain works. This is a good number of years ago. And I remember thinking, I can't believe these parents let this kid act this way. And then I realized, wait a second. Like, I think the Gator chomp is vulgar, but, like, it's not, like, they don't think that. They think that's just supporting their team. So it's just kind of funny sometimes how your brain works. Let's see what else. Yeah, so, Charles, I guess best of luck trying to convince your kid to do something different. Now, maybe if it's a Baby Shark, maybe you could do, like, this little deal right here. That's about all the bite the Gators are packing these days anyway. So maybe the Baby Shark could be this right here, maybe. I don't know. Let's see what else. Mark Woodmansee and Spencer Clark having a little Carson Beck conversation. You'd love to see that. Let's see what else. Nature Gator taking what, frankly, is a little bit of a cheap shot at Jake, as he waits to get back on an NFL roster again. And listen, he didn't make any bones about that. He's obviously, working hard, trying to be ready. And I will tell you, I mean, Georgia's obviously had so many guys who've been drafted, but I think I've said this before, that I actually end up getting more interested in, like, when Kearis Jackson makes a roster as an undrafted free agent, or what some of the guys are going to try to do this year. I end up probably rooting for those guys a little bit more, a little harder than some of the sort of bonus baby first-round draft picks who have their future secured. Like, football to me is still a really inspiring sport. There's a reason that football, especially college football, is so popular. Like you watch some other sports things that are going on, it's just like grievances and drama all the time. I mean, it's just like, who's got their feelings hurt today about whatever thing. And like college football is still about what do you go out there and earn for yourself? And, how do you go out there and take, responsibility for yourself and take care of yourself? And it's not like the grievance Olympics, every single day about every single thing. And I really like that. I like that. And, there is, the idea of sort of making an NFL roster as an undrafted free agent or as a guy who kind of had free agency thrust back upon them again, like that's really, really inspiring. And that is such a better version of sports than whatever's playing out during the day on ESPN in any given moment. And that is all I'm going to say about that. Paul Moon, the subject of Travis Smith and C.J. Wiley, boy, major priorities, as he calls them, and 2 receivers you'd love to see Georgia win with. How about Phillip Wells showing up over here on YouTube today? Boy, that's an interesting cross-promotion. Henry Dion, I don't know if the subject of bald eagles came up. He said that we have a lot of bald eagles down here in Central Florida. I didn't know that. I see a lot of bald people, but bald eagles, I haven't really seen a lot of those in Central Florida. Pretty interesting. Let's see what else is going on. Foster Moss says, B, all the baseball will have to do is win 2, and they ain't in Nebraska. Of all the things about the college baseball postseason that are kind of weird, the Super Regional is the least weird thing of all. It's the same 2 teams playing in a 3-game series. So a lot of sports, kind of gives you the idea of the playoff series. This is Georgia against NC State in a playoff series. And whoever wins 2 first, best 2 out of 3, whoever wins 2 first is going to Omaha. That is indeed the case. Now, once you get to Omaha, you kind of get back to sort of traditional baseball postseason where there'll be, double elimination for a while, and that gets a little bit weird until you get down to the final series again, which becomes a little bit more normal again. But if you're not super well versed in by the way, our buddy Cody Chaffins did a little thing on that to kind of get you updated on stuff like that. But this is the part of the baseball postseason that feels the most normal for those who are used to following other sports. It's best 2 of 3, and whoever takes that 2 first goes to Omaha. Let's see what else. Mark Woodmansey, I believe the announcement, according to the rules, is the announcement for the contest registration period ends today, 11:59 p.m. I believe we're announcing on Friday. I believe that's the case. Jonathan Aaron says, "Did you see that a baseball player got a ban for life for gambling? He bet on himself and his team and lost a lot. And they lost all the games. I hate to see that. Yeah, there's seemingly more of this here right now. And, obviously the sports themselves are going to try to crack down this kind of stuff pretty hard. I have a little bit of a weird opinion about stuff like this. I won't go – it's just kind of complicated. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be a crackdown on some of that kind of stuff. And, the coaches are worried about it. I think that's one of the reasons why eventually you will see an availability report in college football. That's one of the things that Mike mentioned, and it did come up last week at SEC spring meetings. Coaches have always been trying to be really secretive with their information. But in some respects, being really, really secretive does not help your team, and perhaps for some of your players, it maybe makes things a little bit worse. And so, giving some information away, it's the same reason why, why there are so many sanctioned press conferences, because by, giving people a chance to sort of, access players and quote coaches and getting quotes, things like that, sort of, kind of takes the premium value off of that. So therefore you don't have people being chased down in their homes and this sort of cable news thing where you're kind of running along somebody with a microphone. Sports, by having sanctioned press conferences, takes some of the value out of the quote. So therefore you don't have the run along deal with the microphone that you sometimes see in the regular news. Availability reports would sort of go the same way. It's if so-and-so's availability for the game was in question, well, obviously that information is really, really valuable. But if we can say definitively that player's not playing, then, putting it out there kind of deflates some of the value, which perhaps, kind of softens some of the market to get that information. And it's important to note when it comes to the NFL that, sometimes people call those injury reports, but they're really not. They're really availability reports. We don't ever really know how injured someone is. We just know if they're playing or not, or some degree in between available and not available. That's what it really is. All right, let's go to DawgNation.com here for a minute. On DawgNation.com, JP on the subject of umpires here. DT happy with the long show. He says, I guess ultimately, I believe some umpiring consistency is an issue. I think the inconsistency is long-time college umps that learned it one way and are now adjusting to TrackMan, which leads them to be inconsistent, especially on borderline pitches where they have 1 or 2 seconds to make a call. So this is another thing I have sort of a weird opinion on, is I kind of agree with JP on this a little bit, that I believe that the technology to judge umpires is actually making some things a little bit worse. And I sort of feel this way overall, that let's say that we didn't have the really precise replay technology we have now. By the way, in college baseball, there's not a ton of really good replay sometimes, just a small number of cameras in a lot of these stadiums. But I think that technology overall is actually making officiating a little bit worse. In other words, let's say something's a bang-bang play, whether it be, if you want to keep it to baseball, throw to first base, boom. It seems like it was kind of close. Did the foot touch the bag first? Did the ball touch the glove first? You kind of know how this is, right? As an umpire, you're sort of trained to watch the foot and listen to the pop. So you want to hear the pop of the glove as you're looking at the foot. That's how umpires sort of train. But a lot of these big-time plays are pretty bang-bang, and it's sort of hard to tell one or the other. I've always sort of felt like, and maybe I'm a little bit of a Luddite or something, but I've always sort of felt like that the knee-jerk reaction, my gut instinct on a judgment call is probably just as valuable as watching 17 different replays and realizing that by a fraction of a second, this outcome may have been more likely than the other outcome. Like, I'm not super pro replay in sports because there are occasionally instances in which replay completely clears up and we know that an incorrect call was obviously made. Well, it's good to have replay in that. But it sort of feels like in a lot of instances that replay ends up not really clearing things up nearly as much as we'd like for it to. Or in some cases, the officials don't maybe properly apply the replay system. So I definitely think the idea of the box on the screen, by the way, for most college baseball games, at least the ones that are on the sort of streaming platforms that Georgia's been relegated to, you don't have the box on the screen for those, but a lot of us are used to seeing that for Major League Baseball. I think the box on the screen has made umpires worse. I do. I think they're second-guessing themselves, and maybe with good reason. It's like everybody always talks about bring on the robot umps, and there's nothing that drives you crazy more than like one of these C.B. Buckners or Angel Hernandez, one of these well-known bad umpires who I think have earned that bad reputation, honestly. But I do sort of feel for. I mean, if a guy's throwing 100, and by the way, the other thing that's messing people up now are these catchers are getting so good at framing pitches. And the way they teach it now about and watch all the catchers, they drop their gloves and then they bring the glove up. Because it used to be give your pitcher a target. Well, now they flash a target, they put the glove down, and then everything is framed back into the zone. And they kind of teach them how to angle it this way, or, everything is framed in the zone. Some of this stuff is really, really hard to do. Everything's being second-guessed. The catchers, some of the framing stuff has gotten it's amazing how well some of these catchers frame pitches that are not strikes, probably. And the guys are just throwing so hard. So I know I joked the other day about my son wanting to, fire all the umpires. I do think umpiring's a really hard job. I do. I think umpiring's a really hard job. All right, a couple other comments will be done. I got to go to Facebook here in a moment, too. DT mentioning Ousmane Kromah. Yeah, it certainly seems like Kromah has been a good running back in Georgia since he was a freshman. Obviously, Georgia fans like the idea of an accomplished in-state back like that being a part of the program. And, I don't know. I mean, I'm just being honest here. I don't know what kind of evaluation Del McGee had on Ousmane Kromah. If you want me to be honest, that's my honest evaluation, is that it certainly seemed like Del McGee had a different evaluation of Ousmane Kromah than the recruiting rankings would have suggested. Because the moment McGee went to Georgia State and, different people were here at Georgia, the relationship between Kromah and Georgia seemed to change. And listen, Del McGee's a very accomplished coach. I'm not saying he's wrong. He may be right. But if you just want to be honest here, it certainly seems like there was an evaluation of Kromah that perhaps changed for Georgia when the running backs coach changed. And that's just sort of my best guess on that. All right. Let's see what else. Go to Facebook. On Facebook. A little late getting over here today, but Matthew Goodwin says the problem with instant replay is they should leave the gray calls as called on the field. And I guess that's what they try to do in all sports with the idea of the play confirmed. The play stands. That's typically a gray area that they just allow to stand. I tell you, the worst is basketball. And, to me, the worst thing about replay in basketball is it's inconsistently applied. For instance, Let me give you a situation of a basketball game. Let's say that a team is in kind of like a full court press situation. Inbound underneath your own basket, or, going full court. Inbound under the basket, trap comes over, guy extends an arm to deny the pass. There's a deflection on an almost catch, ball goes out of bounds. In almost every situation, let's make this college basketball. In almost every situation for the first 38 minutes of a game, 39 minutes of a game, in almost every situation, that is a bang-bang call, and that is going to be out on the defender. You deny the pass, ball goes out of bounds. In almost every situation, that's out on the defender. In the last 15 seconds, though, now we're watching the replay, and now we're saying it deflects off the defender's hand, then back off the offensive guy's hand. Now we're watching this replay over and over again to see who truly touched it last. Now, in one way of looking at that, it seems like we're trying to be more accurate. But we're not doing that with the same play the first 38, 39 minutes of a game. There's a sort of understood situation of guy sticks his hand out, ball goes out of bounds, that's off on you. Whether it really was or not, that's just the way it's called. The baseball version of that is what you call the neighborhood play. Do y'all know this? We're on a double play. Ground ball to short, toss to second baseman catches it, pivots, throws to first. If you really go and watch some of these replays, a lot of those guys are leaving early. And, in youth league stuff, they'll call that because umpires in youth league baseball love calling everything. I mean, listen, there's nothing they love more than making a attention-generating call. That is just what they live for. But nonetheless, the neighborhood thing, it's 9 times out of 10, you just sort of let that go. That's just sort of thought to be an out. But, if you want to really get granular with the replay, well, that becomes a little bit of a different type of story. Jacob O'Neal's got Mavs in 6 for the NBA Finals. By the way, when does that start? A month from now? Seems like the hockey and the basketball have both taken a very long break. Celicia Gagnon, great to see you. Thanks for the kind words. Jeff White, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Let's see what else. I love the cool down because you never really know what we're going to end up talking about. And we've been talking about replay now, which is kind of interesting. Barry Watkins says the NCAA baseball lumps have been terrible. Yeah, look at time. Some of the stuff Sunday was driving me crazy too. It is. And all I'll say is that I'm right there with you. And then there's also part of me that's yeah, this is a really hard job. This is a really hard job because, there's no decision that impacts an outcome of the game more than balls and strikes do. And this is one of the reasons why, and for a lot of you have a lot of baseball experience, umpires, if you argue a play in the field, they're going to give you a good bit of latitude on that. That's just what baseball is. Umpires, a lot of them are pretty thick-skinned, but they are not here to. They are not going to hear your complaints about balls and strikes because A, it slows the game down, and B, it's just hard. It's just hard. But I thought some of the stuff on Sunday especially was pretty wild. Pretty wild. All right, let's see what else. Jacob O'Neal says NBA Finals start tomorrow. So there you go. I always kind of like the basketball and the hockey more on the front end. My favorite thing is round 2. When it's round 2 and you've got 4 series in both sports, I always think that's the best time of the spring in terms of every night there's just so much on. I actually get a little sad. I'm at this day of my life, I'm not watching it nearly as much as I used to. But I get a little sad when it gets later because there's just less stuff on. Silver Britches says college football officiating could be better for sure. Yeah, some of that's just bad. Some of that's bad. Some of that is just bad. All right, back on Facebook for a moment. Back on YouTube as well, and we'll get ready to say goodbye to some folks here. Mark Woodmansee says he's going to pull for Dallas over the other team, and I love me some Luka Doncic. I like watching Luka play. I guess I've heard some people kind of complain about personality-wise, whatever else. I've always enjoyed watching Luka play. I mean, I loved Luka and I hate, obviously, everything about 2020, the worst year of our lives almost certainly. But I did like quarantine Luka. I did like, what was it called, the bubble? I liked Bubble Luka. He was fun in the bubble. And that was just a heinous time of our lives. But Luka was fun in the bubble. Jonathan Aaron mentions the injury report, like the availability report in the NFL. Yeah, one of the things that Bill, and he mentions, Bill Belichick was famous for putting everybody on there. Brady, I think, was on there in some form or fashion, as he said, every single week. So you can somewhat abuse that. I'm sure some coaches would try to. But yeah, for sure. All right. Let us see what else. Spencer Clark says he cannot pull from Mark Cuban. Yeah, the Cuban thing is kind of weird, right? Because he sold the team, but he's still out there all the time, right? Lance D also pointing out that, back in our day, when we were younger, those of us who are close to my age, Tom Glavine definitely benefited from, sometimes if whoever's catching, if they set up outside and Glavine hit the spot, the umpire a lot of times would give it to him. There was some of that. There was some of that for sure. All right, we got to get ready to go. Good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust RS Andrews on that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.